Perhaps nowhere on Earth has there ever been a group of people more versatile than the
Fakertarians podcast.
If you like sex, you're going to love
This podcast.
with the same active ingredients as Viagra and Cialis.
I'm not pleased to see you. I just come to watch the nest earlier. There are so many of us who have so much to say to women, and we don't. Why? Because we're scared.
Yes, Fakertarians. I am so mad about the content you put out.
Dave is mad. Don't be like Dave. Be happy and listen to this episode of the Fakertarians podcast.
But yeah, I logged into my channel and, well, there was nothing there.
Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 20 of the Fakertarians podcast. I'm your host, John Hudak, along with Jeremy Kantorowicz, Archie Flower, and one of my sock accounts. Oh, and our tech guy's on today, too. Sorry, I missed you there. So today we have on Jacob Daniel. He's a moderator for the Mises Caucus. How are you doing today, Jacob?
I'm doing well. How are you guys doing?
Pretty good.
Pretty good today.
pretty good.
So before we get started, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I've been a libertarian loosely for a few years now. I consider myself an anarchist, also a Christian. So I actually do also run a Facebook page called Daniel 3 Biblical Anarchy. And I also know the people in the Mises Caucus because Luke, Mike, and a lot of them are all from my neck of the woods over here in PA. And so I've known about them for a while and been loosely affiliated. And then in the past month, they asked me to come on as a moderator for the Facebook page to help with the monitoring the posts and the inflow of new members and stuff to screen those and whatnot. So yeah, I mean, I'm that's me in a nutshell, basically. Christian anarchist, and yeah, as we already said, part of the Mises Caucus loosely. I'm not. I don't do much else besides that. I mean, I support them monetarily and I help with the Facebook group, but other than that, I'm not heavily involved as far as like I've not done anything besides that, unless you count going to conventions.
I think it counts. But based on the last time we had a member of the Mises Caucus on, I'd just like to start this episode by reminding you that we're not responsible for any 38-minute videos made by comedians or podcasters about you coming on our podcast.
Okay.
Oddly
standard waiver that we have.
Is that because of Josh or?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we got to get started with a serious question. What's your opinion of the Mighty Ducks 2?
I honestly have never watched the Mighty Ducks 1 or 2, so I can't give you an honest take on that.
You have some homework then.
No, I mean,
Go watch it right now.
Okay. We'll
Like this very
live
moment.
stream it. Live stream it.
That's just going to be the whole podcast.
I do know the comment you are referencing. And,
yeah.
Lou Rockwell writing about that. Yeah, I haven't read the article either, to be honest. That's something I've heard said. But I mean, if you want to give me the general gist of it and have me react to it, that's fine. But I don't know much about the movie or exactly what Lou was trying to say in his article.
The general gist of it, and maybe I'm being biased here, but I think I'm portraying it pretty accurately. This was in the Rothbard-Rockwell report. It was back in I think it's early to mid-90s, was that the Mighty Ducks 2 was anti-white. He talked about how, and it makes you hate your people or something like that. He talks about how there were it was Minnesota, but it was like minorities playing hockey and a girl, and then like the team they were going against was from Iceland, which is like all white or whatever. And then like they learned hockey from black kids in California or something like that. And he acted like that was, I don't know, anti-white.
Anti-white Hollywood propaganda.
I won't ask you to give a full take on it without reading it or something.
Don't forget that there was a brunette. There was a brunette.
There was the brunette. He chose the brunette instead of the evil blonde Iceland lady. Like it was just ridiculous. The whole thing is almost comical, which is kind of why we just bring it up randomly all the time is just because how comical it really is.
Also because
I'm
Bob
pretty
wrote
sure
it.
if you read it, you would just probably laugh at it too.
Oh, Bob.
I mean, in general, I think that, it's easy for us to get caught into one extreme or the other. Is there sometimes anti-right sentiment in mainstream media? I would say that probably does happen. I could maybe, given some time, cite some examples. Is it something that I lose sleep over, or I think is especially problematic? Maybe not as much as others. So, I mean, but yeah, as far as the Mighty Ducks go, unfortunately, I can't comment on it.
That's a bummer. Well, okay, so let's get into some of what we brought you on to talk on originally. We can get onto some other stuff too. We can be a variety show. But do you think the Mises Caucus has an alt-right problem?
No, not any more than maybe libertarianism as a whole, where I think that there is sometimes a little bit of a tendency by people on the right, loosely, to kind of use the word libertarian. I mean, the word is used by people like Ben Shapiro, and then also people like, what's his name? His name's escaping me. The one leftist college professor who's a famous left anarchist. Can't remember his name.
Chomsky?
Yeah, Chomsky. So, I mean, like, loosely, this word libertarian is used on left and right. And honestly, left and right are kind of clunky terms. I mean, if we're going to be serious, anarchism, libertarianism, those are kind of left-wing in the traditional sense. If we're talking about where those terms came from, referring to like the French Parliament, the right was for the monarchy and the left wasn't. So, those labels sometimes to me kind of fall short, and you kind of have to define them, how they're being used in the conversation. But yeah, I don't think that the Mises Caucus specifically has an alt-right problem. I do think that libertarianism as a whole is sort of a movement and a term that is used and hijacked by multiple groups, and the alt-right being one of them.
Would you say there's alt-righters in the caucus at all?
I mean, in the caucus, as far as actively participating in, like, on the ground doing caucus actions?
Sure, or either way.
Yeah,
like
I mean,
because
if we were going to define it by in the group, like in the Facebook group alone, well, then I would say probably, because the group has a lot of members, and just statistically speaking, in a group of over 6,000 members, I'm sure there might be, a half a dozen to dozen, like, serious alt-righters, and maybe some others that are on that spectrum. But, I wouldn't find that surprising. As far as those who are actively involved in the leadership or who are on the boots to the ground, I would expect that to be less. I don't think a lot of people who would identify as alt-right or who have those mindsets are honestly doing much in the, like, LP and running for election, or that the Mises or are going to long-term find themselves at home within the Mises Caucus, would be my opinion.
So I'm going to bring up some specific examples. So if we're talking about in the actual leadership, boots on the ground, there's an Ohio State coordinator. I don't need to name its name because it's not important. We've posted about him before on our old page before it got taken down. He's a fan of Jared Howe. I think a lot of people that listen to this podcast would know a little bit about Howe, but for anyone who doesn't know, he co-hosted Cantwell's podcast while Cantwell was in jail after Unite the Right. He's constantly railing against Jews. Like, if you turned on his podcast, there's going to be a bunch of racial slurs and Jewish slurs and all that.
Right. I know the person that you're referencing, and he is on record saying that he doesn't agree with the anti-Jewish stuff that those people say, but he likes some of the other things that they say. And personally, I don't follow either of those guys, but I've interacted with him on several occasions, and although I don't agree with everything that this particular organizer says, I haven't found enough to be able to condemn him as being alt-right. In terms of, like, I mean, and before we get any further, I mean, how are you defining alt-right? Because, that's a term that is a little bit slippery as well.
I agree it's a slippery term. It's kind of like this mix of people, dissident right, nationalistic, very anti-immigration, very white identity politics. Anti-enlightenment is probably a term for a lot of them. There's a lot of different characteristics kind of mixed together, and I would say someone if they have most of the characteristics, I'd probably call them that.
I mean, because I know that there are some libertarians who are for closed borders or at least not open ones, because it's not always like that's sometimes a false dichotomy. Like because the border doesn't have to be totally closed or totally open. You can have an infinite amount of steps in between that. Some libertarians who are for a more closed border or maintaining somewhat of the status quo are sometimes construed as alt-right because they have, perhaps some nationalistic concerns or some demographic concerns.
Well, I mean, I'd argue that demographic concerns and immigration restrictions and nationalism are like pretty key characteristics of the alt-right.
I think that those can be, but I think it depends on the flavor and the intensity. I think that someone who has like your plain old Republican voter, like would say, I'll use my dad for example, and I don't think my dad is alt-right. But my dad did vote. What's weird, my dad voted for Gary Johnson in 2016 and Trump in 2020, and he was like, well, I don't want there to be open borders. He's like, I want there to be at least somewhat of a vetting process. He was like, I don't want. He's like, I don't trust Democrats. I think that they are influenced to bring in people to change the demographics and whatnot, like who are targeting whites and who have anti-white sentiment. And yeah, I mean, he identifies as a, he's like, this is supposed to be America and we're supposed to have rules and we can let people in, but they need to come in and decide to be part of America and to share our values and whatnot. It's a very, it's the same answer you'd get from Ben Shapiro, basically. And I wouldn't define Ben Shapiro as alt-right, even though he checks those three boxes as far as being for nationalism, being for some kind of border control, and being somewhat concerned about demographics. So what do you think? I mean, I wouldn't label Ben Shapiro as alt-right, would you?
I wouldn't say Ben Shapiro. I mean, he might share some sentiments, but I don't think he goes that far. I'd say he's kind of like boomer conservative take, even though I know he's not a boomer, but
right. And I see libertarians both broadly everywhere and within the Mises Caucus that share some of those similar views, and I disagree with them. I mean, just for the record, I'm for open borders. I mean, I'm a big fan of Brian Kaplan. I think he makes the best forget the ethical argument, which is important, but if you wanted to be just a selfish bastard, you could still make a very strong economic argument for open borders, which is why I love Brian Kaplan, because that's what he does. So I come down very strongly for open borders, although I wasn't always. I did at one point kind of have a more closed border position, but I had my mind changed when I heard arguments from Kaplan and some others.
John Stock here. I want to interject here for a second. So we were quibbling about the definition of alt-right. I don't think it's important whether somebody is per se alt-right or not. I think the question is whether these people that we're going to bring up are holding values of Libertarian Party or even the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, and whether or not like virulent racists and people calling for violence should be included in the caucus. And if they are doing this, why are they not being ejected?
Okay, well, I mean, if there's people in the caucus or Libertarian Party or libertarianism as a whole who are advocating for specific, I mean, here's the tricky part. Let me back up. It depends on what you mean by violence, because if they're advocating for, well, we should just go and shoot this group of people or attack this group of people, well, we would all condemn that. It gets tricky when you're talking about the divide between the minarchists and the statists within libertarianism and the anarchists. As an anarchist, I would view all state action as violence on one level, but I'm
specifically talking about throwing people out of helicopters and stacking body bags.
Okay, well, if we're talking about that the helicopter stuff, 99% of the time when I see helicopter comments, people are making it somewhat tongue-in-cheek. I have not encountered many people thus far within the caucus or libertarianism as a whole, unless I go visit specific groups that are serious about we want to take certain people, whether they be socialists, communists, or certain ethnic people from certain ethnic groups, and commit violence upon them in a specific targeted way that would be distinguished from a a broad government policy that just disproportionately targets one group.
So I want to go back to the Ohio guy eventually, but just to give an example of violence, I would say it's that guy who said he wanted the cops to clear the streets with body bags in reference to BLM. I don't know if you were aware of that guy.
Yeah, I do remember that post a while back. I think it was like, oh, everyone says that Rothbard was controversial here, but he didn't go far enough. Like, he kind of took it a step further. Yeah, I didn't agree with him. I can't remember. I don't think I was a moderator at the time that post was
I don't
made.
think you were either.
Yeah, so I can't remember exactly how much followed from that as far as like the comments and how it was handled.
So Heiss, the guy asked Heiss if he was good, and Heiss said something about like, if Fakertarians wants us to kick people, they shouldn't be going about it this way, and then left him in there. He's still in there as far as I know, at least as of a week or two ago.
Okay, yeah, I don't know. Yeah,
Well,
I mean,
so,
I'm
should
not
somebody like that be included? Do you think, as a moderator, they should still be in the group?
in the group is one thing. I mean, it depends on what do we think the point of the group is. If the point of the group was only people who are involved in the caucus and who are like who share our views exactly should be in, then maybe that person should not be in.
I mean,
but if the point of the group is to
way less.
Sorry, can
I mean,
you
I've
repeat that?
seen
I didn't
people
hear you.
kick for way less.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean, but just to finish my thought, it depends on what we're talking about as far as the group. If the group is about, strictly only people who share our view and who are involved in the caucus should be in, then if that person's not involved in the caucus and doesn't share our views, is advocating for violence, maybe kick them out. But our group doesn't just focus on that. We also let people in who, like when they submit we don't just let anybody in. People request to come in, they answer questions, and we screen them. And I think that's how you guys did it when you were a moderator, John. It's not just an open policy.
Right.
And some people, they say, well, we're just, we looked at you guys and you look interesting, but we want to come in and learn more. So we're okay with those people coming in, as long as they're not there to stir up trouble. And our goal as the moderators and the caucus is, this isn't a discussion group where our goal is like we're just 100% of the time looking at the things that people say and trying to monitor that content. The group is about promoting the caucus and maybe educating people who are coming in interested in the caucus. And maybe some of those people come in and they have some views we disagree with and some views that might be unsavory. I don't know that the best policy sometimes to dealing with people who might be on that alt-right spectrum is just, you said a thing I don't like, so we're going to kick you out of the group.
Well, I just find it interesting that like posts about trans rights seems to be more offensive and worthy of kicking people out of the group than, say, somebody talking about stacking body bags of BLM protesters.
Can you give me an example?
Alec,
any pro-trans post?
I mean, like, I'm not quite following. You're saying that the caucus reacted negatively to someone who made a post about trans rights.
Former moderator, actually. It was Alec, and I'm gonna butcher his last name. Janevsky, maybe.
Yeah. He made a trans rights post. Remember, it made Tom Woods butthurt, and then off he went.
And one thing I would interject is is a group fully managed by the LPMC not a reflection of the LPMC?
Right.
It depends on what you mean by a reflection. I mean, and what the purpose of the group is. If the purpose of the group is these are members of the caucus and the group is only for caucus functions, well then maybe, but that's not the sole purpose of the group. The group is, it has people who are involved in the caucus, but there's people who don't do anything, that are just there to kind of observe, and they heard about the group and joined, and are interested in learning more, or at least kind of watching it and seeing what's going on.
Why do you think it attracts those kind of people? I mean the alt-right kind of people, or the immigration restrictionists, the demographics people. We can quibble over what the definition of alt-right is, but why do you think those types are joining in the first place?
Well, let me just frame this a little bit. I don't think that you're doing this to be deceptive, but you're framing it in a way that sounds a little weird. I don't think that our group targets those people more than it targets other people. I mean, the vast majority of people in our group are not alt-right. We're not attracting. It's not like it's not like we set out to make a libertarian group and then suddenly we didn't realize, oh, our group is 90% alt-right, like Trumpians or bordertarians, and they've taken over the group.
I wouldn't say 90%.
It's a relatively pretty small percentage. We mostly attract people who are Ron Paul style libertarians, and we even have people that aren't necessarily from the Ron Paul school, that are interested in joining and being involved. So now, to get to the actual question you asked, why would I would put it this way, why do some people who are on that alt-right spectrum that we kind of loosely defined look at the Mises Caucus and want to join? Well, there are some commonalities. A lot of these people tend to be anti-war. They tend to be, closer to us maybe from a economic standpoint. And some of them might be disenfranchised with the Republican Party, so they look at the LP as a whole, and they find a caucus that's, closest to them, or that other people have mentioned. So, but I'm not particularly bothered by that. I mean, my heart and mind towards people from that spectrum is that they come into the group, and that, over the course of months and years being involved, that we push them more towards libertarianism and less towards, right-wing populism or nationalism or whatever you want to, label it.
Sorry, I was getting the text real quick. I'm sorry, but so okay. Sorry, there was a personal thing going on. I had to look at my phone.
Sure.
Well, you see, I mean, if you've got people in this group that are coming from these stances, and either there seems to be no real desire to educate or change minds, or further what Mises Caucus stands for, then and just letting it go by the wayside, letting people say stack protesters in body bags, then if there's nothing to help further the education of why that position is wrong, how that's not something that the party agrees with. That's not something that I mean, sure, it's something Rothbard's more or less said. I mean, well, it's taken Rothbard's words a few steps further, but then what would the group? What's the point of the group? That it attracts these people, but doesn't do anything about them or lets them continue those views, and that shows outwardly on the caucus itself.
Before I joined the caucus, I was a Ben Shapiro, Stefan Molyneux libertarian, and now I can't really stand either of them. I mean, I used to be I was a libertarian, but not an anarchist, and I said, well, we need closed borders for XYZ reasons, and I cared about the demographics, and I cared about race and IQ, and now I don't give a crap about any of that. So, and that was mostly through conversations I had with close friends and people within the caucus. I mean, not solely the caucus, but they were part of that. So, I mean, I think there's a tendency in your group to focus on these people and to make it out to be more of a problem than it is. Now let me also say this. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that everything that the caucus has done, everything that Mike has done, has always been perfect, because, I mean, that would be unreasonable. No one ever does everything perfectly. People make mistakes. Now, I'm not going to sit here and nitpick and label all those mistakes, but, I just talked to Mike yesterday, actually, and I told him again, just to make sure, he knew, and I think everyone in the caucus knows, there have been times that I've publicly, before I was involved and since I've been involved, raised my voice and spoken in disagreement towards particular things that were said or done. I'm not always going to agree with particular actions, and there are times that we have taken actions or said things that I would say were incorrect. But you know what? Then it's like, okay, we did the wrong thing. We move on. that doesn't mean that I think that the caucus isn't overall a force for good. And if, I think what we have to be careful of is something I talk about a lot in my podcast, which is the nirvana fallacy, which is where we focus on the flaws of something and use those as justifications for not supporting it. And it's like, well, if you're going to do that, I can only respect that if you're going to go out there and create something that is better than that and that does a better job. Otherwise, all you're doing is sitting on the sidelines, in my opinion, and saying, well, we don't like this group because they don't do these things correct. It's like, okay, no entity, no force, no action in our lifetimes is ever going to get everything right 100% of the time. Now, that doesn't mean you should settle for anything, but I do think that it'd be hard for you guys to make a argument on balance that the Mises Caucus is a negative force in society broadly, in the Libertarian Party broadly, or the Libertarian movement broadly. I would have a hard time being convinced of that argument.
So,
Arizona, you go first.
Yeah. So what happens when, say, somebody in the caucus can openly talk about, stacking people in body bags, BLM protesters? They're not punished for that. They're not ejected. They're not warned by moderators that there's something wrong. But somebody that brings up, or somebody that disagrees with, say, Heiss on immigration, or somebody that posts something about trans rights gets booted. Like, what kind of incentives are being created in that group? Mm-hmm. What kind of message are the moderators sending if that thing is allowed and this is not?
I'm going to say that with, 99% certainty that no one has ever had posts removed or been banned from the group just because they said something in favor of transgender rights. Now, does that mean that they were removed for good reasons? I don't know. Perhaps it was a pride thing. Perhaps it was a misjudgment. Like they thought that person was there just to stir trouble and not actually provide productive discourse. Without having the actual examples in front of me, that's all I can speculate about. But I've seen, as a moderator, I've seen comments and things about transgender rights, and I haven't seen any disciplinary action made towards that. There are people, there was someone talking about transgender rights in one of our Discord or Telegram chats earlier today, and making fun of or speaking negatively of the people who speak against transgender rights. There's plenty of people in the group that say good things about transgender rights. There are some people who, that there are people in the middle. I'm someone who has been labeled as transphobic because I have a more traditional, somewhat Christian-influenced social view that although I acknowledge that transgender people feel the way they feel, and I even use their pronouns, and I try to respect them as people, but I don't believe personally that people can actually transition from one sex to the other, or that there is a total fluidity to these things. That doesn't mean that I hate them or that I, think that they're evil or I'm denying their humanity. I don't believe in their worldview in the same way they don't believe that, I'm a Christian, so I profess, I think that Jesus died on the cross for my sins, and I think that I have a personal relationship with a risen Savior. And people can either say, well, I acknowledge that you believe that, but I disagree, meaning you're saying that you think I'm to some extent delusional and wrong in my mind, or you agree with it. So, and that's how I view transgender things. But I still support transgender rights in the sense that all people have rights. Then you do have some people that perhaps have anti-transgender views. And that takes various forms. There are some people who refuse to use pronouns, who look at trans people and probably have like a bigoted view towards transgender people, think oh well, these are awful people that you shouldn't disassociate with. They're gross or icky or mentally ill to the point where you shouldn't support them. I don't know. I can't exactly speak for those people why they think that, but I don't see tons of that in our group. I see some. Some people have different social views. The caucus takes in our platform, we take a stance that's we don't really get involved in people's social views and preferences. You know, our main big things are like war, the Fed, decriminalization of all drugs. You know, we focus on psychedelics and marijuana, but all drugs, decriminalization. You know, we don't spend a lot of time on transgender rights or things like abortion because we view those as issues that are in the social realm, that there are people on both sides, and that's not our focus. So if people agree with us on the core things, but they're on either one of those sides, they're welcome to join the group and welcome to, you know, be part of the Mises Caucus and be part of our platform and the agenda that we have.
Well, you mentioned productive discourse. Is calling to stack people in body bags for protesting, is that productive discourse?
It depends what you mean by productive discourse. I mean,
come on, dude.
No, I mean, if productive discourse can be anything that's used to further the conversation. Negative, something that's not good to productive discourse is something that derails the conversation. If someone honestly has a view that they think that protesters need to be shot and piled up, well, that needs to be addressed. I don't believe. I don't believe in censorship. Now, as a libertarian and an anarchist, private entities have the right to censor. That doesn't mean I agree with them using that power, except in the most extreme situations, like if someone is making a targeted specific threat towards an individual, or a call to violence towards an individual. But if someone says, I believe in X view, I believe that the best, I don't think censorship is a good response to that. I think that we have to explain why that's not the correct response.
Dude, I mean, can you just tell me, do you oppose that view, and do you think that should be included in the LPMC? Do you think that that person should be able to maintain their membership while spewing things like that and face no repercussions? But people for lesser things are booted all the time.
I don't think that someone should be booted just for making that comment alone. I would have to look at the history of their comments, the context of when that comment was made, the whole body of work of that person, and make a judgment call. But
we haven't even gotten the swastika guy yet.
Well, let's handle one thing at a time. As far as I mean, me personally, I'm not in favor of violence against protesters. Although, if people are going from protesting to rioting in the streets and burning down, people's houses and businesses and stuff like that, I believe in the ability of people to defend their property or to defend their neighbor's property. Now, proportionality and justice is important. So, I mean, if someone burns your house, is trying to burn your house down, I think you have the right to stop them. I don't think you have the right to then go track down their house or business and burn that down. You know what I mean? So, I mean, yes, things need to be balanced and reasonable. But yeah, I mean, without having citations in front of me, I can't get, I'm not going to make definitive comments beyond what I can speculate. And if someone's saying, let's say they said this comment about stacking bodies in the streets, and they're referring to the rioters, well, I think that they are going too far, but I don't believe that it is wrong to use defensive force against people that are going around committing acts of violence against the broader community.
You had spoke earlier. Oh, sorry, Archie, go ahead.
Jacob, I understand you're an anarchist, but let's assume for hypothetical sake, you run for mayor of a fairly large city and you win. One of your underlings makes that comment that rioters should be stacked in body bags. Do they still have a job the next day, yes or no?
If it was someone directly employed by me in terms of me in my council, whatever, as
your
mayor,
chief of police.
Yeah, I would probably fire them.
One thing I did want to bring up is
it's different. Just to be clear, it's different than a comment in a Facebook group by someone who, I mean, we haven't established that this person's affiliation. Like, are they in leadership or active boots on the ground organization and door knocking and all that, or are they just a person in the Facebook group? Because those are two different things. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. I kind of interrupted your point there, but you talked about if someone honestly held a point. How do you know when you see a helicopter mean that they don't mean it honestly? Like, what gives it away?
There's no way to know for sure. You just make the best judgment based upon context clues. Now, we do have a rule in the caucus against helicopter comments, and so for the most part, a lot of them get taken down. Maybe not right away, but usually get taken down. Although, I mean, I'm actually softer on that than some of the mods. I actually, when I was first going through the ropes, I was leaving some of them up there, but then they were coming to me saying, no, we're just going to blanket take pretty much all of them down. I mean, if someone says the word helicopter is around, but if they're making a helicopter joke, they were like, we're just going to, for the most part, blanket remove them. Which, to me, I was like, I don't know. I mean, I can appreciate different senses of humor, and I know a lot of people that use the helicopter reference in a ironic kind of dark humor sort of way, and I don't have any problem with that being allowed, but that is what it is. You're not going to get everything perfect. I'm sure I'm sure you're going to go on, if you go into the group right now, with any of your sock accounts, and I'm sure you could probably pull up a good number of comments and things made that we might have negative views of, but that's the internet, and I do think for the most part our group has a better discourse than a lot of other libertarian groups I'm a part of. I mean, let's talk about, like, there's a Facebook group known as Libertarian Lounge that I was a part of for a while when I first became a libertarian, and that group was infested with like the worst type of alt-right people.
I've heard things, yeah.
Yeah, like the worst. I mean, like a guy who actually literally every day, it made me laugh. He got on every day, made a comment of like, 4 paragraphs of anti-Semitic garbage, and then ended it with libertarian AF. Like day after day, this ensued. But I knew the moderator and the admin in charge of that group, Benjamin Crookston, like he's not alt-right. Like, I mean, I'm not like good friends with Benjamin, but like I've known him a while just over Facebook, and like it's like I don't ever associate the bad actors in his group, with him or the group at large. Now that's just a chat group. I understand the Mises Caucus is a political organization. Maybe you hold them to a slightly higher standard, but I think that we beat out a lot of these groups as far as the rhetoric made. Now, I do think that because of what Fakertarians has done, that people in the caucus have been put in this position where it's just human nature. When a lot of people get on your case and say, you need to do this or else, because if you're not doing X, that means that you accept X, you agree with X. There's a tendency by people to go, well, no, fuck you, I'm going to do what I want. So I do think I think you guys are actually making the problem worse, in my opinion. Now, maybe you should say, well, we should, be adults, be the bigger person, but whatever. Like, people are going to be people, and people tend to be very reactionary, very shallow, and prideful. And so if you're going to have a group like Fakertarians who's constantly targeting the Mises Caucus and demand, like, you're making these posts on a weekly basis, screenshots of all those people, take these people down, you're not actually making persuasive arguments from a good faith position. At least it's not received as a good faith position. It's not like you're coming alongside them saying, hey, we love the Mises Caucus, we noticed these comments and thought they were a little weird, just wanted to bring it to your attention. No, it's you guys are coming in a very demanding way, very accusatory way. It comes across as being in bad faith. Just let me finish. And okay. You're going to get the reaction of, well, no, who are you to come in and demand we do something?
We started out that way.
Nature. Maybe it started out that way, but it hasn't been that way for a while. And
Hudak's muted.
Hudak,
that's my observation.
Your mic isn't working. Hold on. I
You
think
hear me now?
Kodak
Sorry,
has
I had to.
something.
Sorry, I had to
Yeah.
pop out for a second, guys. But I'm back now, so I'll be back to paying attention. So when I was in the caucus is when I actually started bringing up some of these concerns. It was with Jesse Miller, the Europe is for Europeans guy, the guy who said that libertarians need to do more about race as it relates to IQ, social cohesion, and criminality. He was basically dropping like. I want to go on a tangent for a second and say that not every like alt-right or racist or something is going to be running around with like a pointy white hat or something like that. Like some of them just kind of beat around the bush, and that's what Miller was doing in here. And I brought it up to Heiss. Like, I don't know what else you could think by libertarians need to do more about race as it relates to criminality and IQ and social cohesion. And I brought that up to Heiss. He doubled down on defending it multiple times. I left the caucus over it. I made a post about it after leaving the caucus over it. He doubled down on it again. A couple days later, we found some screenshots of him, of this Miller guy ranting about Jews and how Jews run the world or whatever. And he was eventually kicked then. But it seems like it's more of an optics thing to me than it is actually caring about what this guy thinks. Because it was pretty obvious to me for a while.
Yeah, from what I remember of the Jesse Miller thing, the first slew of comments that he made where you wanted him to be removed, the Europe is for European stuff, Heiss interpreted that as he has different social preferences.
Yep.
But then later,
it's just a cultural preference.
Right. No, I'll be honest. I mean, I'm going to side with Heiss there for the.
He's just culturally a white
part.
separatist, guys.
I have no problem in the libertarian sense with people who say, hey, in a free society, I want to associate with my own ethnicity. I mean, I don't see a problem with that. Blacks do that all the time. Asians do that all the time. Hispanics do that all the time. My dad was a missionary as a pastor growing up, so I actually visited a lot of all black churches, a lot of all Hispanic churches, a lot of both abroad and here. You know, a lot of these people just stick to their own. They exercise a preference.
I mean, the LP has a problem with it, in that we have the bigotry as a rational and repugnant plank. I think that's 3.5.
So wait, are you saying that anytime black people of color say, I prefer to date and be within my own...
Date isn't you can't choose who you're attracted to. But if you're saying, like, I don't want to be near him, he's X race, I think there's an issue with it.
No, I mean... Well, listen, there's two different types of ways we can go with preferences. I should clarify, I was talking about preferences as far as two things: where they live and like who they marry and have kids with. It doesn't mean that they hate other ethnic groups or that like if someone. I mean, listen, we were a white family going into these communities. We weren't ostracized. They didn't kick us out. But you know, they clearly have you know, kept to their own. You see this in other countries even, where people express certain pride in their heritage, their nationality, their ethnicity. Now, personally, I don't care about any of that. I mean, you know, I would never be driven to exercise those kinds of preferences. But I can't find any libertarian reason to condemn it. Now, as long as the caveat being, as long as there's no violence associated with it. And you know, obviously, if there's a big difference between people saying, I want to date and live within my own ethnic groups and saying, I want to take the state and use that to create a nation state of only this ethnic group.
So in that same thread, Miller was talking about how he wanted to ban all immigration to the U.S.
Right. This gets into banning immigration isn't the same thing as like, well, we're going to round up.
It's violence against. It's violence.
Yeah, but this is why earlier I said, how are we using violence? Because as an anarchist, well, yeah, I view all state action as violence, but I'm not going to sit here and say anyone who has anything to the right of an open border position, any level of border control by the state is therefore unlibertarian and should be disassociated with.
But what level would you say they should be disassociated with? Because there's a difference between Ellis Island and someone saying no immigrants at all.
Mm-hmm.
I don't quite understand the question. I associate with people not on really levels. I mean, that's kind of a weird way to put it, I think.
I was saying what level of immigration restrictionist do you think is should be in the LPMC or the LP in general?
Well, listen, the Mises Caucus specifically does not have a position on immigration. So, I mean, that's just it. They say, listen, they just, war, the Fed, decriminalization of drugs, criminal justice reform is one of the things that we focus on. These are what we focus on. Like, it's a political action group. If we made every single thing our focus, we wouldn't get anything done. So the group, when it was formed, they said, we're going to pick the topics that we view as being the most vital that we want to focus on. That these are the ones that we're going to say, here are our views, and we will push the LP to take these views, and we're also going to form issue coalitions based upon these views. And immigration isn't one of those things. So, maybe that bugs you, but I don't think that makes the Mises Caucus evil any more than I think that I view any libertarian who has anything other than an open borders position as evil, or that you shouldn't be associated with them. I mean, if this all boils down to we don't like any libertarian or self-proclaimed libertarian that has anything less than an open borders position, well then maybe that's what we have to get into, because I just don't find that to be especially offensive. I disagree with them on that,
said, though,
but I don't find it especially offensive.
There's a difference between an Ellis Island position, like background check, disease check you're in, and like landmines on the border or shooting people at the border or something.
Well, yeah, obviously, and I would advocate, in a pragmatic sense, if we're going to have a state border, I would advocate for as least, as the littlest amount of force involved in that border. I would not want landmines or guns pointed at people to keep them out.
If I may, I have a little bit of anecdotal evidence on this. What I find, like, even if I wasn't an anarchist and I went with a minarchist sort of view, I have a friend who lives in cartel-controlled Chihuahua. And the only reason it's cartel-controlled is because of our war on drugs. And I know that the LPMC would say, well, we just need to fix the war on drugs. But even then, I realize that that's not going to fix it immediately. The cartel is going to disappear eventually. But he would love to come back to the U.S. He was an illegal immigrant. And the fact that we keep him out of the U.S., to me, is a form of violence. It's us saying, no, you live with the mess we created. That's your problem. I don't know. Even in a minarchist sense, I just don't see this closed border sort of stuff. I don't get it.
No, listen, I agree with everything you said. I think it's a form of violence, and I don't agree with the closed borders position. But I mean, it's just a fact that the caucus doesn't take a position on immigration, and we choose to ally with people if they agree with us at least on the other things, and they're going to work with us towards those goals. If they happen to be somewhat for closed borders on any level, as long as they're not, I really don't think that Mike is going to, defend someone who would, like, if we had someone in our leadership or active, like super active in the caucus, who had a view like we should have machine guns and landmines, so the whole way across the border, like.
Well, he was in there for a while, and then I got him kicked after maybe a year.
No, but we talking about Miller?
Ryan Ramsey.
Oh, Ryan, I don't know who that is.
He was an old timer with me being there since the beginning, but when I was a mod, I brought him up once. He didn't get kicked. He eventually got kicked when he was going around talking about the landmines on the border stuff. But okay, I was just curious.
There was a line. Listen, we're libertarians. We tend to. It's kind of funny. You guys are keying. Do you not see an irony here? You're keying in on the caucus for not being really targeting the people who are for closed borders, but really, like, we have a controlled border into the caucus, but like what we're doing is we're exercising restraint in terms of, like, we want to bring as many people in and allow them to be in to the largest degree possible, because listen, I'm a libertarian and an anarchist, and my goal is to convince as many people to care about liberty and to share my views as possible. And if where you draw that line of, like, where you kick them out, maybe we all have different preferences, but the caucus has a line, and they say, listen, we'll tolerate it up to this point because we want people who at least see something here and maybe like it. We want to be able to influence those people and move them towards our goals, or at least even if we can't move them towards our goals, they might be able to still be useful in terms of accomplishing them.
Well, I don't have a problem with trying to convince people of things, even if they have bad views or something. I have a problem with telling them that their views on immigration are okay. I think the fact that the Mises Caucus doesn't focus on immigration is kind of the problem, and why so many alt-righters that think they're libertarians are coming in. I don't think they're changing their views. Maybe some are, but I don't think a lot of them are changing their views on immigration. I think they're thinking that they're going with the Hoppe argument about immigration restrictions being okay.
Right, and I don't agree with the argument. I mean, if I remember correctly, it's like the
net taxpayers.
Yeah, the net taxpayers basically own the border and own the property of the country, and therefore they have.
And that the state should act as a net taxpayer or as a property owner would. That's the best we could hope for.
Right, that's kind of that was like, remember that's what Chase Rachel said too. He was like, we can guess what the property owners wouldn't want, which was like, yeah, I mean, I don't agree with any of that stuff on a personal level.
Well, I know you don't.
But I can remember when I did. I mean, I used to buy into that stuff. I had my mind changed. But I used to be concerned about demographics. I used to be concerned about the border. More so when I was a minarchist than an anarchist. But I was concerned about too many people coming in and voting for Democrats, voting for the welfare state, and that was just going to keep increasing the amount of money we were expending. But I cared about it more from an economic perspective, really, than from a demographics one, like where I was worried about, living next to people of a different color. I mean, I've never cared about any of that. Some people do, but I guess maybe why it doesn't offend me and others as much is that we grew up around it. I mean, for example, my mom remarried a person of color, and he was very racist towards Hispanics. A lot of people, in the Black community are very racist towards Hispanics. I learned,
and I think that's
growing up when I visited those areas. Prejudice and bigotry, it runs deep in people. I just don't know how you deal with it other than, I mean, sure, should we speak against it? I mean, I speak against racism and bigotry, but the Mises Caucus primarily isn't about that. It's primarily about ending the wars and ending the Fed. And I mean, in terms of, listen, the whole point of the Mises Caucus, the slogan of Mises being human action, you have scarce time and scarce resources to do things. So you have to prioritize something. If you say everything's important, then great. You've just made it impossible to effectively act. If all this comes down to is a disagreement over immigration, well then fine, we have a disagreement, and that can be an ongoing conversation. But I'm still left kind of wondering why the demonization of the Mises Caucus, because I think that's what this comes down to. It's one thing to say, oh well, I think the caucus does some good things, although I disagree with them on X. Like, if that's all it was, it'd be like, okay, cool. But when it's like, oh well, the Mises Caucus is, the sentiment I get from the Fakertarians crowd, from the quote-unquote loser brigade crowd, is that the Mises Caucus is a blight upon libertarianism, and that it'll be the end of the Libertarian Party, basically, and if the Mises Caucus were to take over.
I don't think it'll be the end of the Libertarian Party, because I don't think it'll actually take over. But yeah, I do have an issue with the caucus and the idea of it taking over. I think that would kind of... It's been funny to me how they talk about making the Libertarian Party libertarian again, but there's a bunch of immigration restrictions coming in. That's not making the Libertarian Party libertarian.
Yeah, but what do you mean by a bunch? I mean, listen, are some coming in? Sure, but I've been monitoring the member requests now for the past month. I have not seen now listen, some of them request to join. You know what's funny? That actually you know, Jeff Douglas and Mike and Luke, when they were sitting me down, said, listen, you know, we screened through their profiles, and if you see, they even told me straight up, if you see a bunch of stuff that's just pro-Trump and pro this and pro that, you know, probably don't let them in. So it's not even like we're targeting those people when letting them in. Now, granted, some people come in and they're not broadcasting how loud they support some of these things. But then they're in, and we let them in until they give us a strong enough reason to kick them out. But on a policy level, I don't see anything the caucus as doing being remotely related to the alt-right. Like, I don't see it. So sure, maybe there's some loose tolerance and affiliation on like a very low, like broad level in terms of like social media, and like these people will come into our groups, you know, and say some things. But just on a policy level, both within like the LP and in terms of what the LPMC is trying to do in the you know, the local, state, and federal level, like I don't see an alt-right agenda here. So I'm failing to see where I need to be concerned or disassociating myself and joining your side and criticizing them. Like, you know, I mean, ending the wars, ending the Fed, decriminalizing drugs doesn't really scream alt-right to me.
So there's more to it than just on a policy level. But if we're talking on a policy level, Heiss has talked about wanting to get rid of the immigration plank from the Libertarian Party platform. And that's not making the Libertarian Party libertarian again. That's allowing a bunch of Bordertarians in. And I think that would be an issue. I think immigration is one of the biggest issues with the state. Immigration restrictions, rather.
Mm-hmm. I'm probably not on board with that as much. To be honest, I'm okay with removing the abortion plank. I'm not as okay with removing the immigration plank. Although I also don't think, like, I mean, listen, if you ask me, do I think the immigration plank should be removed? I would say, like, I don't think it needs to be removed or should be removed necessarily. But that's also not enough for me to think the caucus is like something that I shouldn't be a part of. You know, again, going back to what I said earlier, I mean, right now the Mises Caucus, in my opinion, is the best caucus in the LP. And now I don't put all my eggs in one basket. Now I'm actually at heart more of an anti-political anarchist, and it's even out of my nature to be involved in the the Mises Caucus as much as I am, just as a Facebook moderator, because I've always been very skeptical of political action, period, in terms of a pathway to liberty. But I also believe in division of labor, so there are some people who are going to be more on the route of agorism and trying to resist the state through counter-economics. There are going to be people who are out there educating people and raising their kids to be libertarians. And then there's people like the Mises Caucus who are out there trying to do things on a political level. And to me, it's like, well, you know, I want to be involved somewhat on all three levels because I don't want to just count one off. I mean, even the one I think is the least likely to succeed, you know, if there's still even a chance, I'm not going to just scoff at it. You know what I mean? I'd love to see liberty in, probably not my lifetime, but heck, if we could see liberty in my grandchildren's lifetime or my great-grandchildren's lifetime, that would be amazing. So I'm not going to discount anything. But you know, in terms of then the political level, I think the Mises Caucus is doing the most and is focusing on the best issues. It doesn't mean I agree with everything they do. There are plenty of things that, you know, I've been vocal about in my disagreement, but the overall message and strategy I do agree with, and the attitude too, because I think that the attitude towards, like, the division between the Mises Caucus and some of the Libertarian Party isn't really on immigration so much. I think it's sort of like the Mises Caucus, we tend to look at the LP as, well, we should be out there and we should just be blasting statism, and we should be professing truth, and we shouldn't care what people think of us.
I mean, I'm happy with blasting statism. That's never been my issue. Yeah,
but then there's the more pragmatic crowd of the Libertarian Party. They, you know, like, I do like Amash, but a lot of the stuff he said over the past month has really irritated me in terms of, like, just the reinforcement of the worship of the American body politic and government and stuff. That's been bothersome to me. And I don't think that someone who's the face of, like, if Amash were ever to become the face of the LP, I'd have a problem with him saying that stuff even more. Because to me, It doesn't mean I support what happened on the Capitol Hill. Like, you know, they were a bunch of MAGA Trumpers for the most part, just upset about an election. So, like, when that happened, like, I kind of laughed about it and was like, well, what a bunch of idiots for the most part. But at the same time, I didn't then take to social media like the LP did on Twitter and like Amash did and be like, oh, this was an affront on our democracy and how dare they, and like all offended like they were on sacred ground, you know. And I know you guys scoff at the cathedral rhetoric, but I think that stuff is spot on. So, you know, I just don't see enough in disagreement or in negative in that column of the, you know, in terms of the evaluation for me to disavow the Mises Caucus or to agree with the accusations that they're a negative force in these spheres.
I mean, Jacob, I see them. Oh, go ahead.
What are your feelings on the fact that a fair amount of the people that you just described as MAGA Trumpers storming the Capitol identify with libertarianism?
Well, like I said earlier, that libertarianism is a word and term that's hijacked by a lot of different groups, some on the left and some on the right. You know, I would like to get those people to realize what true libertarianism is.
Not bordertarianism.
Well, even more so, it's not Trumpism, because I mean my main problem with the Trump and MAGA crowd is the worship of Trump and the QAnon stuff and you know, like, I don't have a problem with storming the Capitol, but damn, storm the Capitol for a good reason. Like, for good
We've had 200 years of really good reasons to storm the Capitol, and you're doing it to install a dictator. Like, pick a better reason.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but yeah, I mean, we don't need to focus on that. I mean, I mean, I don't view, there's not a lot of MAGA people in the Mises Caucus. There might be a lot of people there are a lot of MAGA people that refer to themselves as libertarians, and that does bother me. But
well, there was the guy who had that fight for Trump video had stuff about rejecting replacement and we're the real minority, and then it had the swastikas subliminally flashing. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do remember that. And
yeah, why was it removed?
Yeah, I mean, there's not a lot of love lost between me and the major Trump supporters. Now, I'm talking about like the diehard ones. There's also a lot of Trump supporters I get along with great. For example, one of my...
Yeah, but what about this specific one in your group that is a member of the LPMC? And I think is he an organizer? I can't remember. But
I think he's a county chair. I don't know that he's an organizer or not. I can check.
This guy, he's got a video, Fight for Trump, and he's got swastikas and SS runes in it. And that wasn't enough to boot him from the caucus. What the fuck is?
Was that you're talking about that one video?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, that was puzzling because that came off of a Facebook page.
Liberty Revolution, I think it's called.
That's his page that he runs.
And there's a lot of people that follow that. I think it's like 18,000 or 20,000 likes or followers. And a lot of their content's good. And then there was that one video, and I was like, I don't get this. I didn't know if it was posted ironically or what. So I don't know. That is confusing to me. I don't know what the purpose of that video was. It almost came across to me as someone sharing it ironically, although if it was, they didn't necessarily make it as obvious as they should have.
But he was saying he's not a big Trump supporter, but he thinks the election was stolen, so he wants to fight for Trump. So it definitely wasn't ironic.
Well,
there was nothing ironic about it.
Well, then I just think he was wrong. But I would be skeptical of if he actually made that video or perhaps knew of all the weird stuff that was in that video.
But I mean, if you had shared a video that had subliminal swastikas flashing,
I would take it down.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you know, some people, again, like there are going to be some people that do things that I view as wrong, and they won't change. People tend to be stubborn and not willing to admit when they're wrong, and that's on both sides, and that always bothers me. But if I let that, you know, if that was the line in the sand, then nothing would get done, because that's, as long as I've been alive so far.
But yeah, Nazi videos aren't a line in the sand.
No. What's not a line in the sand is people who are unwilling to admit when they were you're going to be in any group you're a part of. You're going to run into some people that when they make mistakes or they do something stupid, they'll just always be defensive, and they won't admit they were wrong. They won't take something back. I've had that in my work life, had that in my family. I've had that in different volunteer organizations I've been a part of before in the past. I've seen that in churches my whole life. People. My general rule of thumb is that people tend to be stupid and shallow and prideful. So usually if I can attribute someone's actions to one of those three before I attribute actual malice, that's what I do. Because I think for the most part, people who actually are evil and have hearts filled with malice is more the minority. I tend to think it's usually more easily explained by stupidity or pridefulness or something like that.
I want to interject about incentives again. So, okay, what kind of incentives are the moderators and the caucus at large sending when people like that are allowed to be in there and they're allowed to say shit like that, post things like that with no consequences, and the leader of the caucus comes out and says it's all right?
Which one was this again? I mean,
we had the guy stacking bodies, and then we had the guy with the swastikas in his Fight for Trump video. And I think Heiss commented on both of them that he was not going to listen to us about it, and he wasn't going to do anything about it.
Probably has more to do with you guys than it does about the actual content.
Yeah, but do you see the incentives that are there? Can you acknowledge that there's an incentive there, that if nothing's done about that and the leader of the caucus is saying that he's not going to do anything about it, that those people are now incentivized to be bolder and more of them are incentivized to come in?
I don't know. I mean, in my time there, in both the group chats and in the Facebook page, I've continued to be vocal and say the same things that I'm saying to you guys.
Give me an answer. Can you see how that would incentivize them to be bolder and or more of them to join if it's not seen as an issue and it looks like they're welcome there? Would you not see that they would believe
I think that
they
there
would
might
incentivize
be.
to come there?
I think that there might be isolated incidents where if you focus on those incidents, you could say, well, this might create a bad incentive.
But this is the overall atmosphere in there that it's permissive for that stuff. It's permissive for them to be there.
I disagree that it's the overall atmosphere. I think that there are isolated incidents where probably mostly when you guys get involved that perhaps the wrong action is taken. But for the most part, I've seen our moderators ban and delete more people for Trump and anti-Jewish stuff than anything else in the past month. I mean, I think once a week we've deleted and banned people for anti-Semitic comments. I think at least once a week we've had to not let somebody in because they were actually we'll let people in if they're liberty-minded, but then there's some people that were trying to join that were literally, you go on their wall and every profile picture is a MAGA hat, and every they're not actually libertarians, they're Republicans. And it's we'll work with Republicans in terms of issue coalitions, but it's if you're an actual there's no point letting a Republican into the Mises Caucus if you're not at least even if you're a diehard Republican and part of your local Republican committee, it's I don't know what purpose you have in the Mises Caucus group.
So I want to go back, like I said I would maybe 45 minutes ago, now that we've all forgotten about it. I want to go back to that Ohio State coordinator we were talking about, the Jared Howe fan, who said that he understood where Jared was coming from and wanting to deport Somalis, and said that he thinks Molyneux is right about immigration and police shootings.
Yeah, I think he's wrong. I said that to his, well, not to his face because it's the internet, but I said that right to him. I said, I think that's wrong and stupid.
No, I don't think you accept that. I don't think
no, but I mean,
the problem. How much
of a problem can the caucus have with people who? I mean, I'm now a moderator, and I am when people say something that guy said those things, and I said as a moderator to him, no, I think you're wrong for these reasons. I didn't get disciplined for that.
I know. I'm not saying you get disciplined for pushing back on it. I'm saying the fact that those sentiments are there is an issue, and those sentiments are in leadership.
I mean, from what I understand, I mean, there's a lot of Ohio State. He's not the Ohio State organizer. He's one of,
I believe there's 3.
Many. Okay, I mean...
let me check.
Well, if there's 3, why not
4,
just get rid
4.
of them? You'll have 2 then.
But there's 4, just to be accurate.
Or 3 then.
Okay. Yeah, I mean... I don't think that's those views aren't enough for me to think that he shouldn't be in the caucus.
I find it
AOC is great.
Yeah. I find it funny that you guys are talking about pragmatism and radicalism, but you guys are so permissive about all this shit that can come in that's unprincipled. How are you any different than the prags? When you're letting these people that are unprincipled come in, and you're just like, okay, as long as you agree on this issue, it's fine.
I mean, you get a lot of people that'll openly. I mean, for some reason, Bill Weld is like everyone's example of, bad, which is true. Bill Weld was not great.
Bill Weld sucks.
Bill Weld sucks. Fuck Bill Weld. But like,
we can agree on that.
Right.
There's one thing we can all agree with in this podcast, hopefully, is that Bill Weld sucks.
Right. Yeah. But Bill Weld sucks. So you don't try to produce another Bill Weld. You can't do that. And not Bill Weld in a Bill Weld way, but a Bill Weld in a Chris Cantwell way, or something along those lines. It's you can't permit that in a even being in a pragmatic or trying to open people up to the idea of liberty, even if they may have some non-libertarian views. You have to make sure that you address those non-libertarian views and not fester them.
Yeah, I don't see them festering. I mean, and when I see people say things that are wrong, I generally get on and comment and try to correct and try to show them where they're wrong. And maybe I don't convince them the first time around, but I didn't get convinced the first time around. I think it took from the time I got into libertarianism, it probably took a year and a half till I really started to disagree with the bordertarian stuff, and then it probably took me I think actually it was only this past year that I actually started to have a problem with guys like Molyneux, although it wasn't so much for his border stuff. I got mad at Molyneux for what I viewed as persistently 100% wrong takes on all the police shootings that were happening. Is where I finally kind of was like, okay, well, you don't even seem like a libertarian anymore. You're coming across more and more just like you're pandering to the Trump crowd, which is sad because
he followed the money is what he did. He followed wherever the money went, which is an issue about, there's another thing to bring up. Issue about cults of personality and people that make their money off of telling people what they want to hear. That window starts to shift. Stephen Molyneux has a lot of great content, had not there anymore, but he had a lot of great content. I started out listening to Molyneux. I can remember, 2011, 2012, 2013. It started to get a little weird, and then Trump hit, and that ship
and
sailed.
He's an empiricist. He's spoken out against white nationalism, but he's an empiricist.
You became what you hate.
But that's the thing is the cults of personality tend to do that. That's how they make their living. So they are going to move to wherever it is that people are going to pay them to pander to, whatever their most profitable audience is. And when you begin to center the direction of a group around some of those people, then you start to get issues, because then, people that we've been talking about.
Okay, I mean, do you see a problem with that in the caucus?
With the hero worship thing, I saw a huge problem. When I was there, but...
Oh hell yeah! I think that was. That's why we got booted.
Okay. I have spoken in public criticism of both Dave Smith and Michael Heiss and Maj, and that's all I can remember off the top of my head. But again, it's not like it's not like enclosed. It's not like I'm keeping this all private. It's not like I'm just texting Mike or sending emails to Dave saying, "Oh, I didn't like this." I publicly criticize them. and yet they still brought me on the moderator team. So I don't see a problem of hero worship or anything. I literally remember in the last meeting, Mike was literally like, "Come on, guys! Like, I want feedback. I want some criticism." Now, this does happen. People tend to idolize and sometimes fall into kind of a subservient worship role around their leaders, and that can be problematic. It's not easy to avoid in any group you create, but that's why I think it's honestly, if I asked Mike and Luke why they were okay with me being on, it's probably because they realized, well, Jacob is on our side, but he's also not afraid to provide some useful critiques and feedback and pushback when necessary. And if I was a leader of a group, that's what I would want. I would want people in my inner circle of leadership that would put a mirror up and be sort of like checks to things that I would do, but not coming from a position of bad faith. And all I can guess at is that somewhere along the way with you, John, that at some point it was no longer being received in good faith. And maybe that's like a personality thing. Maybe like, you and Mike have some kind of weird, like personality traits that clash. I don't know. But I wasn't there to witness it, so I can't say for sure. But all I know is that you guys keep on saying, well, if the caucus really wanted to be good and foster this or that, why don't they do these things? And I just keep going, well, we do. But maybe we don't do them perfectly. But I think for the most part, the times where maybe the caucus is the least is like the most reluctant to take action is where you guys are the loudest. And well, I can't ignore that. I mean, correlation isn't causation, but when the correlation is like 100 to 1, it tends to.
I mean, they do it when like it's someone like I said who has like the white hood up or something. Like they do it for the most egregious examples, but they don't for the rest. And that was part of the reason I stepped down as a mod and then eventually left in the first place. Like,
well, then we're just different because I mean, I'm motivated to change those people's minds, and I know how you change people's minds is generally not by attacking them. You generally have to build relationships with people and to slowly challenge their views over time. That's how people's minds get changed. They don't get, it's like the death by 1,000 cuts. It's not a single strike or a haymaker that will change people's minds.
I mean, for convincing people, yeah, but you don't have to put them in leadership positions to do that.
Yeah, but I mean, let's go on the worst takes here. I think right now, even if I was being really generous, we might have 2 or 3 examples at most of low-level people in leadership that might have. Okay, I mean, give me the grand total then. I mean, let's run down.
I don't have everyone that's ever said anything.
Is it 10? Is it 20? Is it 50?
You got Heist going around saying that systemic racism doesn't exist, and that's going to bring in a bunch more of these type of people.
Definitely.
Systemic racism defined as what?
Do you need me? I'm not a dictionary. Do you need an exact definition?
No, I mean, there's systemic racism is used in 2 different ways. It's used to describe sometimes institutional racism, or sometimes it's used to describe racism in the society abroad. So, I mean, are we talking about
the state inspector?
I mean, the system has a color preference.
Mm-hmm. Have you heard the phrase "driving while black"?
I mean, I think it just depends on how you define these terms. Whenever someone brings up systemic racism, I ask for a definition. Depending on the definition provided, there are times I go, yes, I agree it exists, or no, I don't think it exists as you defined it. It's another one of those slippery terms. The one thing here's where Mike might say it doesn't exist, and I would agree. I do not believe that disparity is the same as discrimination, or
not necessarily, but it can be.
But then there should be evidence. It's not. It might be the start of a disparity. Might be cause to look into something, but it's not proof. You have to still provide the proof and the argument for why it is. And unfortunately, the best arguments for systemic racism come from libertarians and not from the left. And I know Mike was probably speaking mostly to the left. So sure, we as libertarians understand.
Into the group. This was an LPMC there's a comment in the LPMC group. He was speaking to you guys.
Yeah.
Right. He was probably saying systemic racism, the term that's used predominantly by Democrats on the left, the way that they are saying it exists, it largely does not exist.
He was talking to you guys. He was saying it was a false narrative.
Well, there was one that was out of the group, and then there was one that was in the group. But it's been a pretty, what's the word, consistent between the two.
Right. And again, like I said, I mean, if I understand he was saying it to the group. What I'm saying is that that term, systemic racism, is used predominantly by people on the left in the Democratic Party to describe and the way they to describe something that, in the way they define it, I would agree with Heiss, doesn't exist.
How do they
is BLM a corporate Marxist movement?
The actual group, like there's an actual group called Black Lives
corporate
Matter.
Marxism?
That is a self-described Marxist entity. Yes, Black Lives Matter. The sentiment and the broader movement has some Marxism in it, and also it doesn't. Kind of like the Occupy Wall Street movement had some people of Marxist or socialist persuasion, but then even some, but not all, there were libertarians and other people involved in those groups as well. You know, and that's, I don't think that's something that Heiss or anyone in the caucus would disagree with, what I just said. But yeah, I mean, the term systemic racism, as it's defined by the left, and they're the ones that predominantly use that term, they're using it in the critical race theory, identity politics way, which I would agree doesn't exist.
Yeah, but Heiss didn't say, it doesn't exist in this way. He was saying it's a false narrative. It does not exist.
Maybe he should have been more specific. I don't know.
I'm pretty inclined to think he thinks it doesn't exist because that's what he said.
Okay, well, if you went to Heiss, if you went to Heiss and said, well, I agree that systemic racism as the left defines it doesn't exist, but I think you could make an argument that there are state policies and entities that have a disproportionately negative effect on minorities. Well, I feel like you would probably agree with that.
I mean, I think that is systemic racism.
Mm-hmm.
If you define it that way, then sure, but that's not how the left predominantly defines it. The left predominantly defines it as if there is this boogeyman out there of, like, you know, that like the system is, there's a bunch of closet racists out there who are targeting black people, and it falls back into their identity politics sort of critical race theory postmodern worldview, which, you know, views people predominantly in these group identities and competing positions of power. And because blacks are a minority, they are just inherently the victim of systemic racism. Like, it couldn't be otherwise. Like, if you were a minority, you're almost inherently going to be on the receiving end of systemic racism. And that's what leads many on the left to define, and I've had people in your group tell me this, John, that, well, racism isn't just people who view, like, their race as superior or another race being inferior. Racism is if you are the majority race and you are, you know, basically oppressing the minority races. Like, it's
I disagree with that, but
plus the use of some sort of majority power.
I disagree with that, but I also just want to say something about the group for a second, because there's Mises Caucus members in our group, there's LibSocs in our group, there's Prags in our group. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's not an actual caucus, it's like a political discussion group that's basically anyone's there. It's not like a
bit of a dumpster fire.
And if I may add really quickly, my stepfather is a person who has all of MLK's recordings on DVD. He was a big civil rights advocate, and we talked recently. He went to a liquor store and he saw black men. He's a moderate Democrat. He saw black men with a mask on, and he told me, I got scared. And I said, that is the underlying racism that we have to deal with, is that for white people, we do often see black people as a threat when they really aren't. So yes, saying that they're...
Everyone
has that.
But human nature is to view groups that look different than your groups and to have a fear reaction. And
yes, but at the same time, that fear reaction is in of itself racist.
Then we're all racists, and the term loses pretty much all meaning. because you can't stamp that. That's just human. I mean, maybe there's different levels of that, but that's just human nature. People see
racism.
Listen, that means that my 4-year-old son is racist because my 5-year-old son. You know, we've been quarantined a lot for the past year, and he was just getting into that age of being socialized. But he notices sometimes, and it has more of a awkwardness around people of color because we live in an area that's mostly white, more so than white people. Like when I would take him to the playground to play. Now he gets over it, and then he plays with them, but he has an initial apprehension. So either we're going to label my 5-year-old son as racist, which is like, okay, if we want to use the word that way, sure, but then it's just pretty much lost all useful and impactful meaning because it pretty much applies to anyone. Now, you know, we should not give in to those fears. We should seek to judge people based upon their merits, of course, and not just give in to our
we definitely should
base impulses and fears, but just the existence of that kind of fear and skepticism, that natural biological, that's just your brain acting in evolutionarily pragmatic ways, which is like,
well, if
saying
that happens,
the different is risky.
I mean, but here's the thing: is where did your son get that behavior from? Like, are you willing to say here and now that Richard? Okay, so Richard Dawkins was right about mimetics. That there are inherited traits that we get that are not based on biology, but are based simply on the fact that we are inborn with that nature. Because that's really all it comes down to.
I'm not an expert in Richard Dawkins and the subject you're talking about, but I would say that I think that it is just, I mean, you see this in animals. Animals tend to be afraid of things that they haven't seen a lot of and that are different than them.
Animals don't fucking attack their own species.
Animals don't have ethics.
They do a lot, actually. You ever see like
they do, but it's
there are certain species of monkeys that will fucking like go to war and like
for resources. For resources.
Just for the hell of it. I mean, it's not like there's. I mean, we're getting into the weeds here a little bit, but yeah, I don't think that you can use the word racism in that way and have it still be a word that means much, unless you're going to say there's just varying levels of racism. But then it's just like, okay, well, we all have varying levels of racism, but then there's actual like capital R like racists and people who are hateful. But you know what I care about is action. I care about if people are advocating violence. Now, sure, beliefs can influence action, and like I watched your debate with Dave, Archie, and I kind of understood the point that you were trying to make, which is that yeah, if someone is racist to the point where they have a negative view of another group of people, and they view that group of people as being subhuman, that makes them more likely to commit violence against that group of people than they would if it was different. But that just means point. Oh well, that's what I thought your point was.
Granted that I did not express myself clearly at all in that debate, and if you're a Back to the Future fan, the best summation of the debate from my point of view is when the train goes over the cliff at the end of Back to the Future 3. I'm the train that explodes. So totally I didn't do well in that debate expressing my concerns. My concern is when you redefine what humanity is, what a person is. And when you redefine someone and say they're not human or they're subhuman, you are in effect redefining the nap itself.
Well, I don't agree with that, but I guess what I should say is I think that a better argument and a more true statement would be what I said, which is that I mean what you said is similar to what I said. I mean, I think if you I don't think that you violate the nap just by redefining people or groups of people to be less human than you are, because that's still not an act of aggression. But I think what it does is it lends to people being more likely to initiate aggression and violate the nap. I think that would have been a better argument, but we're getting into the weeds here there even. But my point being that I understand the danger and the reason why when you see someone on Facebook or social media and they say something that sounds racist or that is racist, I understand why you want to disassociate from that. But to me, we have two options. We either continue to disassociate with people, or we try to engage in the war of ideas with people. And I am just of the mindset that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that letting people into your group with their stupid ideas and then allowing their stupid ideas to be challenged is better than just saying you're not allowed in here the first time you say something stupid. Insofar as, like, there's a line, but it's better to err. I would rather err on the side of letting more people in than kicking more people out.
Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and that's what Fakertarians operates on. That's why we look at the LPMC.
So here's, I mean, we're going to have to wrap this up soon because I'll have to go soon. But I think the last thing I'd like to say would be, or like the last subject I'd like to talk about is, I think the problem with Fakertarians is not that it's wrong to call out bad ideas. Where I think you guys have gone way too far is that you've decided to become like, we're gonna pick a group of people or specific leaders within the group of people, and then we're gonna make it our mission to consistently, ongoingly attack and target these people to whatever your end goal is, to discredit them, to maybe deplatform them, or get people to not support them. Whatever. I don't know what your end goal is, but it just seems to me that isn't especially helpful. I don't view, like, I'm sorry, maybe this will be where we have harsh disagreements, but if you view Dave Smith or Tom Woods or Michael Heiss as being extremely problematic, that we need to be kicking them out of, or either kicking them out of the libertarian movement, or saying you're allowed to be identified as libertarian, but you have some bad ideas and you need to sit down and stop trying to do anything, I just disagree. I think that while I have disagreements with all three of those people I just mentioned, I think they are overall overwhelmingly positive forces within the party, within the movement, and I'm honored to be part of a group that is allied with them and that's fighting to do the things that we're doing. And I don't think it's bad to point out bad ideas and to challenge them, but Fakertarian seems to be bordering more on the, well, let's target people and deplatform them and become this major opposition group towards the Mises Caucus and those associated with it, more so than just like, oh, well, when people say something that's not libertarian, we're going to challenge it. There's a way to challenge ideas in good faith and to maintain good relations with groups and people. You don't have to burn bridges down and create a silly ongoing rivalry.
Well, here's one thing I will say about some of those people that you mentioned. Michael Malice has made a post saying that trans people are crazy because they take hormones. And I can tell you, as a person who has to go to an endocrinologist regularly, that's not the fucking case. It's just not. So either he is trying to mask his transphobia or his lack of understanding behind medical science that no one would agree to, or he's just plain dumb. And I do think he is problematic. And Dave often suffers from that same sort of mentality, is that these people are just crazy. And it's like, no, they're not crazy. I don't even know where to start with them. So that's just my point. I'll cede to Jeremy now.
Yeah, and well, you say deplatform. Nobody's trying to deplatform anybody. I know it's something they like to throw out because, well, they make money off of having podcasts or running a pack. But to have such a platform and try to lead people in and make them feel comfortable as part of libertarians can embrace them. I know we probably beat Fuentes like a dead horse, but it's such a shining, blunt example of we're fellow travelers. No, we are not fellow travelers with Fuentes because he doesn't like war and wants to end the welfare state, and we're just not. He has different ideas and outcomes, even though we have the same ideas, the outcomes are not the same. It's not libertarian. It's not fellow traveling. You know, I'm not a fellow traveler with Ilhan Omar, because we have a lot of the same, ideas about, social policy or, or civil liberties. I mean, we do, but I'm not a fellow traveler with her. So you can agree with certain things. You can, you can say, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I totally agree. Wouldn't necessarily sympathize, although I believe Dave usually means empathize, but I can't embrace Ilhan Omar or AOC because, we have some agreements on some positions and say, well, good enough for me, we're fellow travelers. And that's the problem. They view that as wanting to deplatform. No, Dave can have Fuentes on his show and do what he wants and have his show and say what he wants. I don't care. But when he starts trying to bend and twist libertarianism when it's not, that's where the problem is.
Is Dave Smith alt-right in your opinion?
No.
Okay.
So, he's alt-right adjacent.
No,
what does
I don't
alt-right
think
adjacent mean? Just that he doesn't hate alt-right people and will be friendly with them? Or do you think he shares... Well, then I'm alt-right adjacent because I'll be friendly with alt-right people and try to have conversations with them. That's how you change people's minds. You don't change people's minds by
Are you
ostracizing them.
To recruit them and bring them on as listeners to your show and then funnel them into the LP to get those kickbacks for membership? Yeah, the heist bucks.
Sorry, I didn't quite hear all that.
Are you actively trying to funnel those people into the LP so you can collect on the membership dues or the kickbacks from that, and into the LPMC so then you can click on that? That's different.
Right, that's different.
I'm
that's the
not
difference.
I'm not actively trying to bring people. I'm not, as a moderator, I'm not actively targeting alt-right people and bringing them in and then trying to get their money.
There's a difference between talking to people and what is currently going on in the LPMC. You guys are funneling them in there.
No.
Yeah, because you're telling them the anti-immigration standpoint and all the cultural views are okay.
What cultural views? Just to be, just the.
I mean, being fine, demographics, wanting to deport Somalis or whatever, all of that stuff.
Right. I mean, not addressing it or affirming it just festers that mentality that's okay.
Theocracy is good.
Actively going to pages that, bring something up that, essentially actively going to pages with people that are mad about social issues when they're brought up and telling them to check out the Mises Caucus. Then
listen. This might piss you guys off, but although I am for open borders, that doesn't mean I don't see the problems with the sort of forced integration that the state is facilitating with its immigration policy. I view that as being the lesser of two evils. I would rather deal with forced integration than forced segregation, but that doesn't mean that I can't empathize with the people who perhaps either live in areas where the forced integration has been more problematic.
How is it problematic?
When you mix people of different groups together, it can tend to lead to a lot of rising tensions.
Oh man, I had to see another brown cashier at Walmart today.
We're talking
how awful.
This happens on both sides. This happens when Hispanics move into black communities. You see sometimes rising tensions. I'm sorry, that is human nature. People tend to sometimes be tribal, and they can sometimes be very tribal along the lines of ethnicity, and that just happens when you mix people of different ethnic groups sometimes into areas, and it didn't happen naturally through market mechanisms as much. It can cause some tensions. It can cause people to feel uncomfortable because they feel like they don't have any control. Do I personally care about any of that? No. But that doesn't mean that I can't empathize with people who do. because I don't know, maybe that's just different. Maybe I can understand where they're coming from, even though I don't particularly find it to be worrisome. I'm not going to demonize all those people. I'm not going to demonize. I mean, we're talking about a lot of people here. Let's be honest. Like, pretty much everyone that voted for Trump had this concern. So are we going to say that half the country, approximately, or even if we're low estimate, at least a third of the country, that they're basically like, you know, evil, racist bigots, and there's no hope for them, and that they're all illogical, stupid, and irredeemable? Or can we say we think they're wrong, but we can understand what is going on in terms of how they're reaching their conclusions, and the best way to reach people is through discourse and building relationship. And yeah, maybe you bring them in when they have a lot of bad, flawed ideas, and that sometimes
make them
is
state
how
coordinators.
Again, that is a, you're acting like that's a large number of our coordinators are these type of people, and
we can talk about
I asked for a number, I never got it.
I don't have a list of every state coordinator who's done it. I have some I can list off. I have, besides Ohio, I can list.
Give me a sense. I mean, is it less or more than 20 people total?
It's probably less because there's not even that many coordinators in the first place. But I don't know every coordinator like perfectly. I don't know everything they've ever said, or I haven't like quizzed them on their views. But when I see people that say they're in leadership in the LPMC talking about how Molyneux's right on immigration, that's not just the Ohio guy, there's the Connecticut guy who does the same thing, or saying that like they're big fans of Jared Howe, but then when I press them, they're against the Jewish stuff. But that's like reading Playboy for the articles. I mean, come on, you're not just going to turn on a neo-Nazi and be like, well, the anti-Jewish stuff is bad, but the other stuff's okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry. I mean, in my interactions with the people in my state and in other states and the groups, yeah, I mean, you find some alt-right adjacent sentiments. You find that everywhere, and
you find it more in the LPMC than in other parts of the LP, at least from my experience.
Well, that might be true, because I think most of the LP has more of a they are openly anti-right and target more the left. And the Mises Caucus, I think, I don't even think we explicitly target the right. We just don't actively bash them. We don't go out there and actively demonize these people.
When Heisen's trying to harpoon someone, it's always like Jordan Peterson or something. It's not like he's not harpooning AOC or some shit like that.
Is Jordan Peterson right wing?
Yeah.
Okay.
He's not? You don't think?
Not in the traditional sense.
Maybe he's not. You could argue about if he's like alt-right or alt-right adjacent, but just right-wing, like, no?
He's more of a moderate, in my opinion.
I just gotta disagree with you there.
I mean, I don't know how much of Jordan Peterson have you listened to. He's always talking about the need for the left and the right, that they're two equally important sides of the ongoing conversation.
I mean, I've listened to things from him before in the last couple of years. I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but he's definitely seemed to have a conservative bent to him.
I think that's because in the cultural, like, mainstream media arena, there's more openness among the conservatives to hear Peterson out and have those conversations than there is on the left, where they just automatically assume that he's being sexist or bigoted or whatever or transphobic for the things that he says. But I mean, if you hear the things that he says and the things he advocates for, my problem with harpooning Peterson's not that he's wouldn't be that he's right or left wing. It's just he's a statist.
Yeah, it's kind of like Maj.
Yeah, but
VP. I won't make you comment on that. I won't make you confirm or deny. You're good.
Yeah. Well, I do have to get going here in a minute. Is there anything else you wanted to touch on here at the end, or
anyone else have anything? You've been on for a while, and you've been a good sport about it. So,
I guess the takeover unity thing. I mean, it's dumb, dishonest. It's funny to see takeover and then telling people to shut up whenever they I mean, it seems mostly like a Twitter thing for the most part, what I see, but it's dumb. It's not in good faith. Unity is not in good faith, because it's, unity as long as you agree with me, essentially, is what it means, and it's just a rallying, an anti-left, anti-progressive rally is really what it is.
If the only way you can be in the Mises Caucus and involved is that you are lockstep with the leadership, then how the hell am I a moderator? Like, I'm going to keep
No, I don't think
pushing
it's
on
being
that.
lockstep with the leadership, but I think the idea of, I think Jeremy's talking about the thing Dave was pushing about unity, but then there's also like takeover. Like there's a kind of
take over the party in terms of changing the overall rhetoric and direction it's going. That doesn't mean that we're going to kick people out.
No, that's not unity.
We want unity, meaning if
through assimilation.
It's unity through a common goal, which means that if you are on board with our goals,
we're just going to pump as many fucking Trumpers in the next coming years as we can in here, and then Heist is going to get his yacht, and everything's going to be fucking kosher.
Okay. Well, we're just gonna have to disagree. We're just gonna have to disagree there. I've been part of the group for a long time, moderator for a month. There's Trumpers everywhere. Okay, there's people who support Trump in every single libertarian group you're a part of. I don't see that as being an especially high percentage in our group. I don't see even the Molyneux type of libertarians being a especially high percentage of people in our group. Are they there? Yes, but I don't think they're especially high.
I disagree in my experience, but I'll agree to disagree with you on that.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, does anyone have anything else, or are we good to wrap up?
Good.
I think I'm good for today.
Okay, Jacob, I'll give you the last word since you were a good sport and let us yell at you for almost 2 hours. So
sure. No, and it's all fun, and I respect you all. I don't have any ill feelings towards you. I know it maybe got a little contentious there at points.
It's all good.
Listen, here's why I came on, and here's my final word. It's like, I do want there to be more unity. I am tired of the infighting and the drama, and it's why I hate politics. But I do view the Mises Caucus as a force for good. I think that if you are anti-war, if you are anti-Fed, if you want decriminalization of drugs, criminal justice reform, I mean, that's what the caucus is focusing on. I mean, we just bought a domain the other day about criminal justice reform. We've supported even candidates financially who openly have said that they hate the Mises Caucus. So, I mean, the caucus is not a our way or the highway type of group. I think the only thing that has happened is that a lot of the people involved with the caucus have felt like they are being unfairly judged and attacked, and you get pushback on that. That's human nature. I would strongly encourage you guys to think about the approach you're taking, because I don't disagree with the idea of a Fakertarians page. I just think that you guys have gone too far in some of the actions you're doing. My heart would be to see this petty rivalry end, to see everyone work together towards opposing and dismantling the state, because that's what we all want. And if you're waiting to find a group to support or be involved with that's going to check every box, you're just going to be disappointed. If you're not willing to reach across the aisle with people who have different cultural views with you, then you're going to be disappointed, because that's going to happen in a free society. You're going to have people who have different social, cultural, religious, even economic views than you. And you either have to start learning to tolerate that now and to build bridges with those people now, or you basically, I feel like you guys are the ones that are actually saying it's the our way or the highway. But that's just my opinion. I appreciate you guys having me on, at least letting me defend the caucus and to air my views. I respect you guys for that, and yeah, that's it.
All right. Well, let Heist know he can call me anytime. But thanks everyone for watching today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.
Yep. See ya.
Bye.
See ya.
Buy shirt, get money. No, other way. We get money. You send money, we get shirt.